your social life.
Right.
And the physical toll can be pretty significant too, potentially leading to health problems, making you more vulnerable to illnesses. The source really stresses that because it hits so many areas, dealing with burnout early on is just crucial.
That emphasis on acting early seems key. So for someone listening maybe wondering, how can they get a quick sense if they might be heading down this road? Does the source offer like a simple check-in?
It does, yeah. The source gives a few points that can work as a quick self-check, kind of early warning signs that you might be on that path towards burnout.
Okay. What should we be asking ourselves then, according to the source?
First, if every single day feels like a bad day, not just, now and then, but it's persistent.
That's a pretty powerful signal right there.
It really is. Second, if the thought of caring about your work, or maybe even things at home, just feels like way too much effort, like a waste of energy, that detachment's starting to creep in.
Like the emotional toll is just too high to even engage anymore.
Exactly. Third, if you find yourself exhausted all the time, and this isn't just, oh, I need more sleep, it's that constant bone-deep kind of fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
Fourth, if most of your day is spent on tasks that feel either mind-numbingly dull or just completely overwhelming, being stuck between those two poles is really draining.
Yeah, I can totally see how both sheer boredom and being totally snowed under could lead to that same drained feeling.
And finally, if you feel like nothing you do really makes a difference or is genuinely appreciated, that lack of impact or maybe just lack of recognition for what you're
The
putting.
combination. Yeah, it paints a pretty concerning picture. And the source is clear that these things don't just pop up overnight. It's more of a process.
That's a critical point from the source, yes. Burnout is very much a gradual thing. It doesn't hit you like the flu. It creeps up slowly over time.
Right.
The first signs are often subtle, easy to brush off maybe, but they get worse if you don't address them.
So those points we just went through, that checklist, every day feels bad, that kind of thing, those are
Yeah.
the subtle beginnings.
Think of them as the early red flags the source is warning about. Catching those and actively trying to manage the underlying stress is really your best shot at preventing a bigger breakdown later.
Okay.
Source is pretty clear. Ignoring those early signals is how you end up sliding into full-blown burnout.
And as that slide continues, what do the symptoms start to look like? The source breaks them down into categories, doesn't it?
It does,
Yeah.
which is helpful, I think, for spotting the different ways it shows up. You've got physical, emotional, and behavioral symptoms.
Okay.
Physically, you're likely feeling tired, drained most of the time. Your immune system might take a hit, so you get sick more often. You might notice more headaches or muscle pain, changes in appetite, sleep habits.
So the body is really starting to feel that chronic stress load.
Precisely. And then emotionally, the signs include this growing sense of failure, self-doubt, feeling helpless, trapped, maybe defeated. That detachment we mentioned, feeling alone, that gets stronger. You lose motivation, you might develop a really cynical, negative outlook and feel less and less satisfied with what you accomplish.
That loss of satisfaction sounds particularly tough. And behaviorally, what changes might you see in how someone acts?
Behaviorally, well, you might start pulling back from responsibilities at work or home, maybe isolating yourself socially. Procrastination can really ramp up. Tasks take much longer. The source points out you might start using food, drugs, or alcohol as a way to cope.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and you could find yourself taking out frustrations on other people more often, work-wise, maybe skipping days, coming in late, leaving early, those kinds of things.
These are all pretty big shifts in how someone's functioning. Understanding this really helps clarify how burnout is different from other things, doesn't it? Like just regular stress or maybe depression. The source draws some important lines there.
It does, and it's vital because, yeah, these terms get mixed up a lot. The source clarifies that stress is generally about having too much pressure, too many demands on your physical, your mental energy.
Okay, too much pressure. That's stress.
Yes, but the key difference the source makes is that even when you're stressed, you can usually still imagine a point where if the pressure's let up, things could get back under control.
Yeah.
You feel overwhelmed, sure, but there's still a sense of possible recovery if the load changes.
And burnout is different how then?
Burnout, according to the source, is more about having not enough. You feel empty, just devoid of energy and motivation, completely exhausted, and kind of past the point of caring. The article uses this really powerful analogy. If stress feels like you're drowning in responsibilities, burnout is like feeling all dried up.
Dried up. Wow, that image really hits home, that sense of depletion. And there's a difference in awareness, too, the source mentions.
Right, you're usually pretty aware when you're stressed you feel that pressure, right?
Mm.
But burnout can creep up much more subtly. You might not fully realize how deep you are into it until you're really there.
So stress is too much, you usually know it. Burnout is not enough, that empty feeling, and it can sneak up on you.
Okay, now what about depression? The source says there are overlaps, but they are definitely not the same thing.
Yes, and this is a really crucial distinction. The source is very clear. Burnout is not a formal medical diagnosis. Depression, however, is a clinically diagnosed medical condition.
Got it. Different categories entirely.
And the causes tend to differ too. Burnout is mainly tied to external stressors from specific situations like work, parenting, being a caregiver. Depression is often caused by a more complex mix of internal and external factors, genetics, psychology, environment.
So one is very situation-specific generally, while the other can have deeper roots. Exactly. Another thing the source points out is the impact on interests. With burnout, you might just lack the energy to do hobbies you used to like.
Right, too tired.
But with depression, the difference is you might lose the actual enjoyment in those hobbies,
Yeah.
regardless of energy levels. The pleasure isn't there anymore.
Ah, I see. The desire itself fades with depression.
Precisely. The source also notes that with burnout, the negative feelings often relate mostly to the source of the stress your job, for example. With depression, those negative feelings tend to color everything, every area of life.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, how you recover is different. Getting over burnout focuses on managing or changing those external stressors. Depression usually needs a combo of medical treatment, therapy, maybe medication plus lifestyle changes.
It is worth noting, though, the source does say that burnout can be a risk factor for developing depression. So while they're distinct, there can be a connection there.
A very important link to keep in mind, definitely.
Now, the source kind of frames burnout as a journey, right? A process with stages. It mentions a more detailed model, but simplifies it down to a 5-stage progression. Can we walk through those?
Absolutely. This 5-stage model helps visualize that gradual slide we talked about, shows how things can kind of evolve if those early signs get missed.
Okay, stage 1, the beginning. What's that like?
Stage 1 is the honeymoon phase. This is usually at the start of something new, a new job, a big project, maybe starting a family. You're often full of commitment, eagerness, lots of energy. You feel creative, productive, ready to go.
Right, that initial excitement and optimism. Very relatable.
Then comes stage 2, stress onset. This is where those initial demands start to cause some friction. You might begin to neglect self-care a bit, sleep quality might dip, maybe some physical things like headaches or fatigue pop up. You might feel more anxious, irritable, and notice your productivity and focus aren't quite what they were.
The cracks are starting to appear, maybe?
Yeah. Then stage 3 is chronic stress. By now, feeling tired consistently is pretty common. Cynicism and apathy start becoming more noticeable. Social stuff starts to get tricky, maybe pulling away from coworkers, feeling resentful towards loved ones. Procrastination ramps up, and the source notes this is often when self-medication might start, even while kind of denying there's a real issue.
That sounds like a really critical turning point where things could start to snowball fast.
It really is. Stage 4 is the stage actually labeled burnout in this model. Here, pessimism really takes hold. There's often this almost obsessive focus on problems. Personal health gets neglected more seriously, leading to bigger physical issues, chronic headaches, maybe stomach problems, self-doubt is high, and social isolation becomes pretty significant.
Wow, that sounds like a very, very difficult place to be. And the final stage.
Stage 5 is habitual burnout. This is described as the lowest point for your overall well-being. You've got constant sadness, deep mental and physical fatigue. And as the source points out, this is the stage where clinical depression might actually develop.
Seeing it laid out like that, how it goes from that initial high down to potentially depression, it really hammers home that this is a serious decline. What does the source say actually causes this journey? It mentioned it's not just work, right?
Correct. Yeah, while work is a very common trigger, the article really emphasizes that lifestyle factors and even certain personality traits play a big part. It's often a mix of the external pressures and maybe our internal ways of coping with them.
Okay, let's break those down. What are the work-related causes the source mentions?
Work-related ones include things like feeling you have little or no control over your work or schedule, a lack of recognition, feeling unrewarded for your efforts, unclear or just overwhelming expectations, doing work that feels really monotonous or doesn't challenge you at all, and working in an environment that's chaotic, maybe dysfunctional, or just constantly high pressure.
Those all make a lot of sense. Feeling powerless, unappreciated, overwhelmed, or just bored stiff by the job. What about the lifestyle factors outside of work?
Lifestyle causes highlighted are things like working way too much, without enough time left over for socializing or just relaxing.
Yeah.
A lack of strong, supportive relationships in your life. Taking on way too many responsibilities without enough help from others. And critically, consistently, not getting enough good quality sleep.
So it's about that imbalance maybe, and not having enough support outside of where the main pressures are. And the source says certain personality traits can make someone more vulnerable too.
Yes, it lists things like perfectionistic tendencies. Setting impossibly high standards, never feeling quite good enough, having a generally pessimistic outlook.
Okay.
A strong need to be in control, maybe being reluctant or unable to delegate tasks. And exhibiting those classic high-achieving, type A personality traits.
So it's this complex mix of the pressures you face, how you live your life around those pressures, and maybe your own internal wiring. Given all that, how does the source suggest we actually deal with burnout?
The source introduces a framework it calls the 3 R's approach for tackling burnout.
The 3 R's.
Okay. Recognize, reverse, and resilience.
Unpack those for us. What do they mean here?
So first, recognize. This is basically becoming aware of the signs and symptoms we've been talking about. Paying attention to those warning signals in yourself.
Got it. Learning to spot the red flags makes sense.
Second, reverse. This is about taking active steps to undo the damage that burnout has caused. This means reaching out for support and using effective stress management techniques.
So actually doing something to change course once you've spotted it.
Exactly. And third, resilience. This phase is about building up your ability to cope better with future stress and pressures. And you do that by actively prioritizing and taking care of your physical and emotional health.
Recognize, reverse, resilience. Okay, that's a pretty clear pathway. And within that framework, the source gives some very concrete, practical tips, right?
It does. It gives us 5 key strategies drawn right from the source material.
Okay, let's dive into those. What's the first one?
Tip number 1 is turn to other people. The source actually calls social contact nature's antidote to stress. It emphasizes that connecting face-to-face with someone who's a good listener is one of the fastest, most effective ways to calm your nervous system and relieve stress.
A good listener, meaning someone who really listens, not just waits to talk or judge.
Precisely that. Someone who can listen attentively, empathetically. The source suggests reaching out to those closest to you, partner, family, good friends. It notes that opening up actually strengthens those bonds, which is important.
Right.
It also recommends being more social with coworkers, surprisingly maybe, but that can buffer job stress and even improve how you do your job.
And maybe being careful about who you spend time with.
Yes, it specifically advises limiting contact with negative people, the ones who tend to just drain your energy and bring you down. It also suggests connecting with groups or communities that mean something to you. Maybe a religious group, a social club, hobby group, professional association, finding like-minded people you can talk to.
What if someone feels like they don't really have those connections right now?
The source is encouraging there, saying it's never too late to build your network, find new friends. It even mentions the power of giving, noting that simple acts of kindness, a smile, a friendly word, can reduce stress for you and others and help you connect.
Interesting.
And it points out that virtual support groups are pretty accessible now through online therapy platforms too.
So actively building and using those support systems. Okay, what's tip 2?
Tip 2 is reframe the way you look at work. The source is realistic here. It acknowledges that quitting your job, even if it's a huge source of stress, isn't always possible or practical.
Yeah, that's often the reality.
So the focus shifts to changing your perspective, finding ways to create better balance within the situation you're in.
How does it suggest you do that?
It recommends trying to find some element of value or meaning in your current work, even if parts of it feel draining. Thinking about how your work helps others or the service it provides. And focusing on the aspects you do enjoy, even if it's just, chatting with coworkers you like or a specific task you find satisfying.
So consciously shifting your focus to the more positive or meaningful bits.
Exactly. And maybe even more crucial, making sure you find meaning and satisfaction outside of work. Prioritizing time and energy for family, friends, hobbies, creative stuff, volunteering things that bring you genuine joy and purpose separate from your job.
Right.
The source again mentions making friends at work as a good buffer.
And what about actually stepping away from work, even just for a bit?
Oh yeah, the source definitely includes taking time off as a key strategy. Using vacation days, taking sick days when you genuinely need them, maybe even asking for a temporary leave if possible. Anything that lets you physically remove yourself from the stressor and recharge.
Okay, reframing work, finding outside meaning, taking time off. Got it. Tip 3.
Tip 3. Reevaluate your priorities. The source kind of frames burnout as this big flashing sign that something fundamental isn't working in your life.